Welcome to the Vintage Ballers podcast. I'm your host, Brad Coreno. And on today's episode, we have Matt Powell joining the show. Matt attended Barnesville High School, where he became the all-time leading scorer in their basketball history before attending University of Rio Grande and not only becoming a Hall of Famer, but also one of the best pure shooters to ever attend Rio. Matt's son, Luke, who also attended Barnesville and later broke Matt's all-time scoring record, are the #1 father-son scoring duo in the state of Ohio's basketball history. So without further ado, please welcome Matt Powell. Matt, first of all, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I've wanted to have you on now for a while for several different reasons, but for those of you listening, and Matt is my brother's former college teammate back years ago. So when I was a little boy, I kind of idolized you and some of the guys in the team. So it's cool to have you on the show, and I got some stories I'll tell you later about watching you play. But, back then, Matt, when my brother graduated in 91 and went to Rio Grande, I was 7 years old. So I was a little boy, but I was just kind of getting into basketball and love the sport like you guys do. And I know like your son, I just love the sport. And I because of my brother, I really became kind of obsessed with it at that age. And, at that time, my parents were kind of going through a divorce. It was kind of a rough time for me. So I kind of fell back on your team, Rio Grande and my team that I played on and that watching the NBA and college basketball, like basketball was my safe haven. So guys like you have a special a place in my heart growing up because I, kind of grew up idolizing you guys.
Well, thanks for having me on. And yeah, I can remember that time vividly. I can remember you being at the games, some at Rio and some away. And you were always, you weren't playing around, you were watching the game and you were into it. And I think part of that was we were pretty fun to watch, I think, back in the day. So
you really were. And before all of that, I want to take way back to your youth at Barnesville. Matt, when did you first fall in love with basketball and who were your favorite teams, and basketball players growing up?
Yeah. So I grew up, things were different back then. And we always started baseball a lot earlier than basketball back in the day. Now, for the most part, I think, kids start around the same time playing basketball, baseball, football. But I started playing baseball and I really liked baseball. In fact, I thought I loved baseball and still like the game. But then, at about 5th grade, I started playing basketball. And I realized I just really liked baseball, but I loved basketball. And just couldn't get enough of it because baseball, like some other sports, it's tough sometimes to really work on your craft and your game by yourself. I mean, you can throw a ball against the wall, maybe go to a batting machine or something, but basketball is something I could do for hours and hours and hours and hours. And that's what I did by myself. And I stopped playing baseball for a while, decided I would go back out for baseball when I was a freshman at Barnesville. And I was a freshman at Barnesville. This one game, this is a funny story. We played at the Memorial Park in Barnesville, and that's where the basketball hoops were too. And I came to the game, was going to start as a freshman on the baseball team at shortstop, and wasn't driving at the time. Obviously, was just a freshman. And had brought my glove, my cleats, my basketball shoes, my uniform, and had forgotten my glove. And the baseball coach, a great guy, was not happy. He was like, "How can you come to a baseball game and not just forget your glove, but bring your basketball?" And one of the older guys had to give me a ride to my house to go get my glove so that I could come back and play. And I can remember, maybe not that game, but a game around that same time, I'm standing on shortstop and out over left field is where the basketball courts were. And there's just a run of the mill pickup game going on over there. And I'm standing at shortstop looking over there, wishing I was there and not on the baseball field. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. And I just loved it. And I grew up, I thought it was a great time to be a college fan and an NBA fan. I grew up a Celtics fan, grew up an Ohio State and Duke basketball fan. I think the reason I liked Duke was my best friend growing up was a North Carolina fan. So I guess I just kind of wanted to like the team that was opposite of him and what he preferred. So
it's funny you say that about, I'm actually going to have Scott Williams from North Carolina on my program next week. He was supposed to come on yesterday, but he went to Carolina, play with the Bulls, obviously won some championships. Mm-hmm. So played for Dean Smith. And I've had, I had never had a Duke guy in the program, but I've had several Carolina guys. and I've had, some NC State guys, a lot of college guys from that era. And Matt, I couldn't agree with you more. First of all, that era, I think the 80s and 90s was some of the best basketball, ever played. And I know that now it's a different game. Obviously, the shooting's much better now, and it's actually more your kind of game, because your style to me would have fit in this era perfectly. I mean, you would have been, you were doing things years ago to me that are done now on a consistent basis that people, as far as shooting, coming up and pulling up and shooting a three, that wasn't really done back in the era you played in, but you did that. So you were kind of ahead. I always joke with my brother that you were Steph Curry before Steph Curry, but it's not really that far off, because no one was really doing that. Was unheard of back then. I mean, everything went through the post, or it wasn't really a perimeter game like it is today. So the young people watching this podcast, Matt was, literally 25 years ahead of his time, the way you played back in the late 80s and early 90s.
Yeah, the game has changed. Really, the three-point line was just coming in when I started in high school. The three-point line in Ohio came in when I was a sophomore, so it would have been Brett's freshman year. And people were still learning how that worked and what the three-point math was, and how to really calculate what a good shot is. And I give Coach Lawhorn and Coach Thomas and Coach Lamb a lot of credit. I think they were really ahead of their time as well in the way that we played. We played a little bit like that Loyola Marymount style. That's kind of a dated reference, but with defense as well. I think we were the number 2 leading scoring team in the nation one year of all divisions. I think we averaged 102.5 that year. And yeah, it was 3-pointers or layups, and we got the ball up and down the floor, and it was fun to play in that system. I think, as you said, it was fun to watch, and we really had a good time.
It was really fun to watch. And again, when we get to the Rio days, I have so many stories I could tell you, but I remember one specific story I want to tell you about you, actually, that I remember a shot that you took. But going back to Barnesville, so people who aren't familiar with Barnesville, Ohio, explain to them where it is, and what is the city like, and what was it like going to high school there?
Sure. So Barnesville is a town of about 4,000 to 5,000 people. It's about an hour and a half, almost due east of Columbus. So 25 minutes west of Wheeling, West Virginia. So I would call it East Central Ohio. When I was growing up there, it was very much a coal mining, farming, mill town. Your dad either worked in the mine, the mill, or farmed, or a service that supported those industries. Very close-knit community. All the names of the families, are familiar and have been around that part of the world for years and years and years. It was a great place to grow up. It had a nice, vibrant downtown still back at that time. You knew just about everybody I would dribble my basketball from my house to the park, and people would offer you rides, and you would see kids out on bikes and kids fishing. And it was just a great time and a great place to grow up.
What was it like going to high school there, and in your basketball career, Matt, going into high school, did you foresee the success you would eventually have, in high school and beyond?
No, I don't think anyone can really foresee that kind of success. I knew I loved the game. I was passionate about it. I knew that I was working harder than anyone else that I could see. Was always having a good measure of success. Started as a freshman from day one. We weren't very good. My freshman year, we were 3-18. We were not very good at all. Barnesville does not have a strong basketball tradition. It's very much, and has been, a football, wrestling, baseball school from a male sports perspective. So yeah, we weren't very good. The expectations weren't very high. We took a lot of beatings when I was young. And when I was a freshman, you could come to the game at halftime and lay down at midcourt and not crowd anyone. And then by the time I graduated, it was 4 or 5 rows deep, standing room only on
Wow.
the baseline. So.
And getting in, you talk about how the 3-point shot was, basically in Ohio that's when it came about around that time. For you personally, like, when did you realize, like, I could kind of make a living here?
Yeah, I didn't make a living there really as much in high school. It wasn't a big focus of mine. I shot threes, but again, that focus wasn't there like it became a focus when I got to Rio, and I think a lot of that goes back to how you played in the pickup games out on the courts and the parks, right? So when I was growing up, there wasn't a 3-point line until, like I said, my sophomore year. So at the park, we would play to 10. Everything was a 1, no matter whether you shot it from 30 feet or 3 feet. So there wasn't any 2s and 1s or 3s and 2s. And so, there was less of a focus, I guess, on the 3 back then until I got older. And then also I realized too, pretty quickly, that you could stretch the floor. with that kind of shot. And we could stretch the floor. I always felt like if you could shoot the ball with range and you could drive with either hand, you were going to be tough to guard. You could score a lot of points if you could do those three things consistently.
That's so true. And, becoming the all-time leading scorer. And then of course your son later on, we'll talk about that too. But what was that like? And it's funny. I remember specifically talking to my brother, but I don't know if it was probably his junior, senior year of college. We were talking about you. And I was talking about how incredible it was, how many points my brother scored in high school, and that he was all-time leading scorer in North Homestead. And and he goes, you don't know how many points Matt scored. And he told me, I looked you up one time, like, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. And he said, he was just going off about how incredible of a scorer you are, one of the all-time leading scorers in state history, of course. So, how did that, when your game was progressing, what year did you know, like, I could score on anybody?
I felt like I could score on anybody from the time I was a freshman, really. I don't want to sound like I was overconfident, but I felt like being able to shoot the ball with range, being able to handle the ball with both hands, and I was small. I was 6 foot, 135 pounds as a freshman. So you had to learn how to initiate contact, not just absorb the contact. And I felt like, and if you were smart about things, about how you faked and the way you moved, that you could score, and you could score on a lot of different people. If they were bigger, then you had to take a different tactic, a different angle. If they were smaller and quicker, maybe you had to do something different. But and it's just something that I just worked on for hours and hours and hours. My dad built a basketball court in our backyard when I was in 6th grade. It was 24 by 24, had a hoop on each side and lights, had a light on each side. And I can remember they're still my mom and dad's neighbor. They moved in when I was going into my freshman year, moved in beside us. And back then, a lot of people didn't have air conditioning and they slept with the windows open, right? And he still tells this story to this day. He says, he looked at his wife, Donna, and he said, is that kid ever going to quit playing basketball? Because I was just out there forever, just forever.
But there you go. It's funny because I have stories of my brother, Matt, same way, like in the driveway, playing in the snow. And he was always out there, just constantly. And people don't realize guys like you and my brother were Hall of Famers. You don't just wake up out of bed with talent and become a Hall of Famer. It doesn't happen that way. And people think that's kind of how it is. Oh, Matt has natural talent. Brett has natural. That's not how it works. Sure, you have talent, but you got to work it. You got to work your ass off, really. To get to where you guys got to.
Oh, yeah. But and there is times that it feels like work, but I just love doing it. As you said, I can remember, this is no lie, shoveling snow off the court to go out and shoot basketball. And then, your fingers would just get dry and cracked from being out there. There was a gym I used to go to. There was a boarding school down the street from where I grew up, and they would let me go in the gym, but it didn't have any heat. And I could remember going in there sometimes and walking there and taking my boots off with snow on them, setting them in the corner, and then putting my shoes on and practicing for hours. And by the time I would leave, the snow wouldn't have melted. There was no heat in the gym. The snow would still be on the boots. But I just loved it.
That's a cool thing. Like, just looking through, again, when I think of my brother, just seeing what I saw firsthand, I know, all that he put into getting to where he got to. And I think that means a lot for people who don't, behind the scenes, who don't see what guys like you and him go through to get to where you got. It's a big deal because you don't always know. If I didn't grow up with my brother, Matt, I would have taken guys like him for granted. Like, oh, he has some talent, good player, but that's just, he got lucky with some talent. That's what you think when you don't see it firsthand. Seeing it firsthand, and then growing up, of course, playing myself. I only played freshman year, but just being around a lot of pretty great athletes growing up. I told you, they just work. It's constantly on their mind. And my brother and you, it's a passion. That's really what it comes down to. It's almost an obsession.
And I saw firsthand how hard your brother worked once he got to college. He worked extremely hard. And for me, I love doing it, but I also wanted to work hard because I love to win. Don't get me wrong. But as much as I love to win, I hate losing 10 times worse than I love winning. I can't take it. I hate it. And so I never wanted to get beat, period. But if I got beat, I never wanted it to be because someone outworked me, because someone worked harder than me. I just wasn't going to allow that to be an option.
So, Matt, when you go look back at your high school career, what is your favorite memory?
Oh, probably the favorite memory was our district final game to go to the regionals. We played a local rival, a neighboring school district, and they were really, really good. And if we won that game, we were going to be the first team in Barnesville history to ever make it to the regionals, and we were going to set the win record as well. I think today it's still the largest crowd that they've ever had at Meadowbrook High School for a basketball game. Just a phenomenal game, back and forth. I think tied at the end of the first quarter. down one at halftime, down one at the end of the third quarter, ended up winning by 4. Just a surreal scene. The entire town was there. You know, we had a police escort coming back up into town after the game. Played with my brother. My brother was a sophomore and he started on that team as well. So I got to share that experience with him. And I would say in high school, that was probably the best memory in high school.
Oh, it's got to be. I didn't know you played with your brother either. What position did he play?
He was a guard. He's a little bit smaller than me. He's about 5'9". So yeah, he was kind of a 2-guard type of thing.
Okay, no kidding. I never knew that. That's
yeah.
And looking now at this point, obviously, you know, you're going to be recruited by a lot of people. What, you know, when Coach Lawhorn and the staff came to you, what appealed to you about Rio Grande?
So, interestingly enough, I actually didn't visit Rio Grande when I first made my initial decision to go where I was going to go to college. I talked to Coach Lawhorn. I liked Coach Lawhorn. I knew the system. There was a guy that had played there from my generation named Mike Smith from Buckeye Trail, who was a really, really good player. I think he's 6th or 7th all time at Rio in scoring. And I can remember watching him growing up. But when I was making my visits, I never felt like being dishonest or disingenuous with anyone. And I visited Columbia University in New York and the Air Force Academy. And I decided to go to the Air Force Academy. I just fell in love with the place and going out there. And I remember telling Coach Long, he said, you know, we're not even going to get a look. You're not going to come and visit us. I said, Coach, it wouldn't be right. I've made my mind up. And I just don't feel right about, you know, wasting your time. I just don't want to do that. And he was very good about it. He said, you know, listen, I hope it works out for you. If it doesn't, you know, we would love to have you here kind of on the rebound type of thing. And I never forgot that and how he handled that. And when I decided to leave the academy, he was the first person I called. And literally I left the academy on a Thursday and started at Rio on a Monday.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow. I never knew that story. That's cool. And what, you know, what made, I guess, Rio, what was your first impression? And what was your first impression of Coach Lawhorn and the team? And that time, I think Jeff Brown and Troy Donaldson, those guys were all there.
Yeah. In fact, when I got there that year, we were really, really good. We had a guy named Gary Harrison was the point guard. They went
I remember him
that year. Gary Harrison, he's in the Hall of Fame. Mark Ursuline, Brad Schubert, Troy Donaldson, and Jeff Brown were the starting 5. And I wasn't eligible since I had just transferred. I had to sit out that year, having transferred from the academy. They were really, really good. And I was impressed by a lot. I love the style of play. And practices were so intense. You know, we never put the ball down and just ran. Coach didn't believe in that. Everything we did, we ran, you know, ran with the ball, but it was simulating the game. We just didn't run suicides and things like that. So how competitive practice was, how hard everyone worked, how organized everything was. When we, you know, Coach Thomas, Coach Thomas was our defensive coach. Coach Landon was the offensive coach. And I could tell, you know, practices were well organized. And when you came into the game, I always felt like, and we talk about this at our golf outings that your brother goes to and some of our teammates go to, we always felt like we were more prepared than the team we were playing against. From a scouting and preparation standpoint, we always felt like we were more prepared. And that always impressed me.
I mean, you talk about a coaching staff right there, all 3 of those guys. I mean, just one gem after another. And what was there? You said it was very, you know, disciplined. And I had Coach Thomas on the program, and it was so fascinating to hear his story and everybody he knows, all of them. He's just an incredible guy. But what was it like with those 3 coaches? I mean, in that time, and what kind of discipline did they instill in you?
So very disciplined from this practice schedule. You knew what you were going to do. And we never went like 2 and 3 hours, usually hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes max. But we got after it during that time period. And you knew throughout practice, you know, there was a schedule posted on the board in the locker room. You knew what you were going to be doing. We didn't deviate a whole lot from that. You know, if we weren't getting something right, we would stick with it till we did and maybe push something out a little bit. But, you know, each one of those coaches had their own individual subject matter that they were responsible for. You know, Coach Thomas in defense and Coach Lamb on offense, but they also mixed and matched as well. And they were just really good at getting the most out of their guys. And we were a system oriented. We had a system that we ran, but you know, you watch us play. We were very seldom the most athletic team that we were playing against. We were never the biggest. We did work hard in the weight room. Strength was never an issue for that team, but you know, we weren't the fastest, the quickest, the longest, the most athletic, but we got the most out of our guys, and the coaches are a big reason for that.
That's a great point too. I remember being a kid thinking to myself, my brother was a center. He's only 6'5". pretty small center for him, even for that's not that, and I felt like you guys, even Hepner, I think was probably not more than 6'5".
6'5".
Yeah, 6'5". So I mean, you guys really didn't have a lot of, at least the later teams of Rio that I saw with Brett and you and everybody, Walter and Jack Morgan and all those guys, Lacottles, and it just, you're right, there wasn't a ton of size, but you guys are just so methodical and it was so fun to watch. I mean, you guys I just felt like over a period of time, you kind of wore teams down over a period of a game when I watched.
Yeah, I think we did. I think one of the things we were really good at was we were good at playing to our strengths and driving the game in the direction we wanted it to be driven, playing our game. We weren't going to be really successful. And I know when Coach Thomas was on there, you talked about a guy named Priest Lauderdale, and Brett had to line up against him, right? But we wouldn't have been successful if Brett was trying to post him up, and it was a, in the post type of game. But we pulled him out away from the floor. We got up and down like we always do, and we just wore people out, and we made them play our game.
And Matt, I believe that game was one of the games my brother dunked, one of the rare dunks in Brett Coreno's career. I believe it was that game. There's a video of it somewhere. And I remember as a little kid watching it. Yeah.
He did, but Brett could dunk the ball very easily, but he didn't do it a whole lot. You're right.
No, he would just lay it in. Yeah. And I remember the whole bench, you guys all gave him stuff. You guys are all standing up and cheering. It was funny, but I remember that vividly. And I have a story now. I believe it might've been your junior year. I can't remember specifically, but I think it was Tiffin. I'm almost positive because I was with my brother's good buddy who played baseball in Tiffin, Brett Miche. And I remember sitting with him and his buddies watching you guys play. And it must have been like 4 or 5 seconds left in the half. You got the ball. They get someone, I don't know if Jack got it or someone gave it to you. You pull up. It couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 feet in front of the timeline and just put a 30-foot three up at the buzzer and hit it. And the whole arena, the whole place goes, oh, and I'd never seen anything like that before in person. So, I mean, and that was like Steph Curry before Steph Curry. Like I always tell my brother, like that was one of the first times I remember thinking like, oh my God, like, and I was probably 9 then, 8 or 9. And that was a big deal to see someone. And because I used to do that. I used to emulate you when I was little, and I would pull up and try to shoot these 25-foot threes. I did hit a few, but not many. But I mean, I remember thinking like, if this guy, this is incredible to watch someone do that right in front of you. I mean, it was like, and do you remember that at all?
I do, for a couple of reasons. One is I always got amped up for Tiffin. Tiffin had a coach back then that was a fiery guy. His name was Jim Hammond was his name. And he was a local guy from the area that I was from. And when I decided to go to Rio, he actually sent me a note saying, hey, I thought you were going to come here. And he was less than happy about my choice to go to Rio. So I always felt a special need to play well when we played Tiffin. And we had some battles with them as well. And going back to the coaching, we had 2 plays that we ran at the end of practice every day. We called it Hail Mary and home run. So, you see a lot of coaches today, last seconds, they'll call a timeout and they'll go to draw up a play on a whiteboard. We never had to do that. We knew exactly what we were going to do, given that coach always used to talk about time and score, time and score, time and score. And so, yeah, we were always prepared for that. That was one of the plays that we ran. And Jack would catch it and throw it to me. And we ran it every day in practice. It's the last thing we did every day.
I remember that vividly, like it was yesterday. I remember right in front of me. And take it those last couple of years, take us through the team, with Jack at point guard. I think it was you and Walter, my brother, and Hepner, I think were the starters. And I believe the Cottles Larry definitely came off the bench. I don't know if Eric was off the bench. Take us through that whole team. And of course, you had guys like Jason Curtis. You had a bunch of different guys in that team. Eric Burris, take us through the team, favorite moments, and what was it like going through those last couple of years, together and being as successful as you were?
Well, I think you used a good word there, and it's together. And Rio is a small campus in a small town. It's a beautiful place. And when you're a basketball player there, male or female, you spend a lot of time with your teammates. I mean, it's a year-round thing, really, from the day you start school till the time class is over, you're together doing something. And there are times where you're the only people on campus. The basketball team was the only person there. Even the cafeterias and things like that were closed. And it's a lot of long bus rides back in the day to Tiffin and Findlay and places like that. So we were very much together. I don't ever remember anyone not getting along. And I don't mean just not getting along. We were all friends and we hung out together because we wanted to, not just because we had to. And as you said, Jack was the point guard. I played, we call it number 2, which was on the right wing. Walter and Larry interchanged on the left-hand side. And then you had Brett. Brett usually played the 4 when Hepner was playing, and Hepner was the 5. And so Brett was the trailer guy that would catch it and shoot a 3 at the top of it. We always called it the double jump shot. Brett would jump twice when he shot. And
double jump shot. That's great.
Yeah. So we had a good mix. Jeff was tough. Jeff Hepner was tough and strong inside and had a ton of post moves inside. Larry and Walter were both really athletic. and very, very good defenders. They were probably our two best defenders at the time. You know, Jack was just Jack. He was a tough little guy that took care of the basketball and played defense. And, you know, I'll tell you a funny story. Larry and Walter have complained for 30 some years now that Jack only would throw the ball to the right-hand side to me. He would never throw it to the three. And we used to have a play called quick hitter where I would come across and I would set a screen for either Walter or Larry. They'd be wide open for a layup and Jack would kick it over to me. And we were at Coach Thomas's Hall of Fame induction, and Larry and Walter were giving Jack crap about that, right? And Jack said, "Let me tell you something." He said, "It was the very first practice that I came there." And he said, "I dribbled down the court." He said, "The first time I shot the ball." So Coach Longhorn just kind of looked at me and didn't say anything. So the next time down, he said, "I didn't throw it to you. I threw it over to Walter." He said, "Coach Longhorn called timeout." And you can ask Jack this. This is Jack's story. The first time I heard it was this fall at the Hall of Fame induction. He said, "Coach Longhorn looked at me and said, 'You're here for 3 reasons. Play defense, take care of the basketball, and throw it to Matt Powell on the right-hand side.'" And Larry and Walter just went nuts. They're like, I knew it. It's a conspiracy. He didn't want us to get the ball. So those guys, they're still a little salty about that sometimes.
That's great. And looking back at some of the competition you guys faced back then, because it was a good conference. I had a buddy on the show who played with LeBron in high school at St. Vincent St. Mary, and then he played at Walsh. And I started naming some guys from Walsh back then. And one of the guys' name was, I think, Corey Alpine. Was like this. He was a beat. And right away, my buddy Corey goes, "Oh my God, of course, everyone knows him, you know, from those days." What was it like facing a guy like that? I remember him. He was a monster.
Oh, he was. And, you know, every night, literally in that conference was just a battle. I mean, there were literally no off nights. You had Walsh and, you know, Malone was part of that, Cedarville. And then the teams we played out of conference like Georgetown and Pikeville and Transylvania were just unbelievable. Corey Appline was just a stud. I think he was from the Philadelphia area, if I'm not mistaken. He was one of those guys, he would get a rebound. He was big and strong. He'd get a rebound and just start heading down the floor, just the center of the floor, with one thing in mind, that was just to dunk on you. And he dunked on us quite a bit. We had a lot of battles with Walsh, and it was a lot of fun playing against those guys. They were good.
Man, I remember going to a game with my grandma actually against Walsh, and I remember that was the first time I saw Corey. And I mean, and there was another guy in that team, like 6'7", 6'8". I can't remember the kid's name. He was really good. I mean, he was right there with Corey. He was a pretty darn good player, and they gave you guys fits. I want to say you guys won the game if I remember. I can't remember, but I think you guys did. But it was right before the Super Bowl, one of the Bills Cowboys Super Bowls. So it had to be whatever that year that was. But I remember that vividly, going with my grandma and watching that game. And I remember Corey just being amazed by how big he was. I mean, it was like almost like a Charles Barkley, like you're going against this guy who's just a freak of nature.
He gave us fits. I don't think we ever did a really good job of stopping him or controlling him, to be honest with you.
And what was some of the toughest places to play? Give me like top 3 or 4 toughest of all the different places: Mount Vernon, Tiffin, Urbana, all these places.
Cedarville for sure. Cedarville had an unbelievable atmosphere, and they were always really, really good. The gym was always packed, no matter if it was during the week or on the weekend. Cedarville was a very tough place to play. Finley back in the day was probably pretty tough. And then I'll pick one out of conference, and I'll say Georgetown. Georgetown, Kentucky was a tough place to play.
Okay. I remember, I went to Georgetown. I definitely went to Finley before. And I remember that being that was probably about a 2-hour drive from where we were. And Tiffin was out that way. But I remember there was only a couple I didn't go to. I don't think I ever went to Shawnee, or I never went out of state, but everywhere, me and my dad pretty much went everywhere in state that we could. And it was fun because you got to go, all those places were so fun to go to. And it was just, atmosphere back then, Matt, was awesome. I mean, it really was. It was just, most of those gyms were packed. We'd be going on Friday and Saturday nights. And as a little kid, watch your brother and his friends play basketball. It wasn't anything better than that.
No, and I don't know how it is now. I see there's not a lot of student attendance. I guess there's just so much going on and other things to do. But all the student bodies were at those games. Excuse me. But I would say, if you made me pick one place, I would say in the conference, it would be Cedarville. Cedarville was
okay.
Tough.
Why do you think it was? Just the crowd, or was it?
Well, it was a combination of things: the crowd, the gym, and they were just really, really good too, all the time. Really good.
And what is from your junior year? Do you have a specific memory that sticks out to you?
Junior year in college?
Yes.
Yeah, we had that was the year we went to Hawaii and we
Yep,
played in
I remember that.
the rules tournament. So that was fun. That was the year Jeff Hetner played with us. Jeff and I are still really, really good friends. So getting to play with Jeff, I'd actually watched Jeff play in high school. Jeff's a year older than I am, and watched him play in the state finals when they won the state tournament that year. And
No
I thought,
kidding.
man, a really good player. Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh, he was a beast too. I love watching him play. I remember him being very tough, like just underneath of getting all the boards. Yep.
Very, very tough. But yeah, I would say getting to play in Hawaii that year was pretty special.
What was that like?
Uh, we had a lot of free time, so we got to experience, and the coaches did a good job of that, letting us have free time to experience some of the island and the island culture. Basketball wise, it was good. It was good competition.
Now, what was my brother doing on the island? Anything? Knowing him, you probably stayed in his hotel room half the time.
Well, he wasn't out laying in the sun. I could tell you that, knowing Brett. But I'm sure he hung out with us too. But yeah, he was probably back. He would tell you he's probably back studying for exams.
That's exactly. We joked about it back then. I remember being a kid and he came home, and I think it was my dad said, or no, it was my mom, that of all the people in the family to go to Hawaii, or maybe my sister, I can't remember. One of them said, out of all the people in our family, he'd be the least that would care about going to Hawaii. But of course, but that was a big deal. And you guys, I remember being back-to-back years being very successful. And I think, the next year, I remember one of the games Brett said, I thought it was one of the big announcers was supposed to do your game. And he got pulled out at the last second, one of the big ESPN announcers. And I can't remember, my brother just told me who it was recently, but he was supposed to.
I'm trying to remember that. I don't recall that off the top of my head, but I'm sure Brett's right.
Yeah, it was somebody, it was someone pretty big. And he said he was supposed to do that game. And then he got pulled out, something happened. He had to go pull out and go somewhere else, for another game. But yeah, it was just, that time was so exciting. And I remember as a kid, I remember the game days, like of those, the tournament games, thinking like, and we couldn't see it, obviously it wasn't on TV, and we couldn't, it wasn't like now where you can go on the internet and everything's live streamed. And so we had to just wait. And we were, I remember calling my dad, I wonder if they won, how many points did Brett have? What are they doing? I vividly, Matt, as like a 9-10-year-old kid, remember that.
Oh yeah. It was a great time. And like I said, a lot of great basketball was being played. It was just a lot of fun. And that junior year, we had some injuries that year. I think that kind of hurt us a little bit. I got injured. We had some other folks that went through some injuries, because that team, I think, was really, really good.
It was. And what about your senior year? Favorite memory, favorite moment?
Oh, so, a couple things there. We got to go to Japan that year. We played and we won. Right. We won all of our games there. We got to play where they'd had, I think it was the 64 Olympics, 60 or 64 Olympics in the Tokyo Dome. We got to play there.
And Matt, wasn't there some player that was like 7 foot something on one of those teams?
Yeah, there was one. And, that's been a long time ago. So that, in some of the places we went, we were one of the first U.S. basketball teams to actually go there and play. That was a great experience and a great time. And then we beat Transylvania. I don't know if you were at that game or not. We beat Transylvania in the finals of the region to make it to the national tournament. We beat them at home. They were undefeated and ranked 1 or 2 in the nation, and we beat them at home. And that was a great experience. That was just a fun night.
I was not there, but I do remember that going down, and I remember the whole thing, because it must have been those tournament games after that we were trying to pay attention to. And you played. I vividly remember being a kid and coming home for school and knowing that it was going on that night. So I wish I could have been older, and I wish we had the technology we do now, because we could have watched every single game. It'd have been so different. But so something personal now. We gotta set the record straight here.
Sure.
So who introduced Brett Michelle?
So there's an argument about that. Michelle and I had a lot of classes together. Michelle was a math teacher, and I minored in mathematics. It's my opinion that I was responsible for that. Jason Curtis and some others have a different opinion. Curtis believes it's him. And I do have to confess that when we asked Michelle, she said she thought it was Curtis, but
that's what I've heard. I wanted to get the record straight from you, though.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, I still think it was me, but we'll give Jason the credit.
All right, we'll give Jason the credit. That's fine. Yeah, I talked to Michelle the other night about that. I was laughing. I'm like, I'm going to ask Matt in the podcast to see who really introduced them to. So when you look back at Coach Lawhorn and just a legendary coach, what were some of the things that he instilled in you that went beyond basketball?
Yeah, I think working hard, being prepared, being honest with yourself about what you can do and what you can't do, what your strengths, what your weaknesses are, always giving 100%, and surrounding yourself with good people. We didn't have problems on the team. We didn't, not academically, not socially. I mean, I think Coach Thomas said this on the podcast when he was with you. They looked at the parents when they were recruiting kids. They wanted kids that if they could, had strong family backgrounds. And yeah, I think that's one of the keys, is just surrounding yourself with good people gives you a much better chance, whether it's in basketball or in life, to be successful.
Yeah, it really does. And favorite Brad Coreno story from college?
Oh my gosh, there's so many.
I'm sure there's tons of them.
There's tons of Brett Coreno stories. We still tease Brett to this day. When Brett showed up, his favorite outfit his freshman year was, he had I think it was a green pair of shorts, a purple Laker t-shirt, and a Cavs hat. And so you could, Brett's a pretty tall guy, so you could see this guy coming down the sidewalk out like on the quad at Ryle, and you knew it was Brett because of that outfit. So, but Brett, man, I've got so many good Brett stories that involve basketball. He like you said, he loved the game. Brett didn't start his first year or year and a half, but just worked his tail off and became the only 2-time MOC Player of the Year in the history of the conference. I believe was an All-American his senior year. So, yeah, Brett worked hard. Brett worked hard in the classroom. He was in the library a lot, studying, and I just can't say enough good things about your brother. I think the world of him.
Matt, and I think it's with you and him and really that whole team. Again, I think your style of play in many degrees would have fit this era very well. And I always say, Brett was a rare big that could shoot the three back then. And that wasn't really done by centers at that point. And of course, you being the gunslinger you were, and some of the other guys in that team, you guys just played a different style that, again, in my opinion, would have been very well suited for the past 10 years of basketball we've seen in all levels.
I think what you're seeing now, minus the isolation, we didn't do a lot of isolation stuff. You see a lot of that today. We moved the ball well and moved within a system. But, what you're trying to see teams do today is stretch the floor. And we could definitely stretch the floor. That's for sure. And I would agree with you. I think, and I know everyone says this in a nostalgic way that, it was better back then. I'm not saying it's better back then. What I am convinced of is that team back then could be very, very successful today in the way the game's being played.
I have no doubt about it watching it. Not a doubt. And being inducted to the Hall of Fame, what was that like, to know that you're in your university's Hall of Fame? I mean, it's got to be an incredible honor.
It was an incredible honor. We had a tournament when I was there. I don't know if they still have it or not, called the Bevo Francis. And if you know anything about Bevo Francis and his whole story. So being in any group that includes guys like Bevo Francis and Wayne Wiseman and some of those guys from back then, and the Jerry Mowrys, who's a part of our golf group now, and some of the other great players that came through there, being included in that group was really special. It's humbling too, but really, really special. And then having a lot of your teammates there and stuff to share in that with you was special as well.
I mean, that it has to be. That's a huge honor. And it was so fun to know that you, my brother, some of the other guys, Coach Thomas, so many people from that era got into the Hall of Fame. For me, just being sentimental myself, I mean, that was really cool to see that, to know that people I watched growing up that were idols that I idolized when I was younger, are in the Hall of Fame. And now anytime I go to Rio, I can, knowing that you guys are enshrined there, it's pretty cool. I mean, just coming from my perspective.
No, I think it is cool. And I really mean this when I say it. I couldn't have gotten there without my teammates, Brett and Jack and Larry and Jeff and Walter and those guys, because we truly were a team. And there were things, that they did well that I didn't do, that didn't necessarily get headlines. And I really appreciate that, because our goal was to win. And we really didn't, honestly, there was not a lot of caring about who scored or who did what. We just wanted to win, and we wanted to beat you, and we wanted to beat you bad.
And Matt, like you mentioned how the Bevo tournament, of course, I remember that. I remember having shirts saying the Bevo Francis.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I know, oh yeah. And I had a sports editor from Youngstown named Dave Burcham, great guy. And we started talking about my brother, and I said, we went to Rio Grande. Instantly, he goes, Bevo Francis and Bob Evans. And I said, exactly, he knew exactly where it was, everything about Bevo. He goes, you don't know how big Bevo was when I was a kid, when he was like, 8, 9 years old. He goes, he was huge.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, you want to talk about a very nice, humble man. He would come to the tournament, and we always had a a banquet where he would get up and just speak briefly. He and his coach, Newt Oliver, and Beaver was just the nicest, most humble, kind of gentle guy you would ever meet.
And now I want to turn it to a little after your career. And, what did you do after that? Give us a little background of what you've done. Of course, I know you started a family. And of course, I want to get into Luke's career too and talk a little bit about that and what that was like as a father.
Yeah. So after leaving Rio Grande, started in the aluminum business, was in the aluminum business, different roles, started working for a company called Ormet, worked in the aluminum business pretty much for the next 27 years or so. And then in the last year and a half, I've worked in private equity on the manufacturing side of a private equity firm in New York. So yeah, aluminum's taken me all over the world. I mean, literally, you name a place, I've either been there or been close. And it's been a really good run on the aluminum side of the business. Married my high school sweetheart, Penny. We've known each other literally our entire lives. Started dating when we were 16. Have two wonderful children. My daughter, Sarah, went to Case Western undergrad and is now in law school at Capitol in Columbus. And my son, Luke, is in his third year of undergrad now at Ohio University.
And Luke's career, when did you realize, how special he was going to become basketball wise? And before you start on that, who was the better shooter, Luke or Matt Powell?
Wow. I don't know about that. I take a lot of pride in how I shot the basketball. He could shoot it too. And he shot it with the same kind of range. I don't know. I think it's close, and I wouldn't want to live on the difference. I'll put it that way.
I like that.
Pretty doggone close.
I like that.
I knew that he had a chance to be a good basketball player early on for two reasons. One, I could tell he just loved the game, and he was always playing. And two, he had a drive and a passion for the game that I thought was pretty similar to the way I felt about the game. And he just continued to work at it and get better and better and better. And, I told a lot of people as he was coming up that I really think he's good. And I told people in high school that I thought he was probably better than I was. And a lot of people that are nostalgic that grew up with me said no. And I said, well, he's going to score more points than I did in high school. I predicted that early on. And everyone's like, no, there's no way. Well, he did. And he had a very, very successful high school career. Got sidelined now by injuries. He's had a shoulder surgery, an ankle surgery, and probably needs another ankle surgery. So he's not currently playing right now. But yeah, he had a wonderful career, and he worked really, really hard at it.
I mean, I feel like I kind of followed him because of you, obviously, watching on your Facebook and talking to my brother. So I knew that he was a really good player. And then, of course, I watched him that senior year. We kind of followed everything you were posting and just kind of paid attention to what he was doing. And I remember there was a photo of you guys hugging after he broke the record. And it was a really, I think it's one of the coolest photos I've ever seen, because for those of you listening, Matt and Luke combined are the all-time father-son scoring duo in Ohio history for basketball, which is incredible. So, and I don't know if that's going to be broken anytime soon.
Well, I'm not sure either. And if you look at that picture, we were talking about how close we were as a group, the Rio group. If you look at that picture, if you span it out, you'll see Walter, Larry, Coach Thomas, and Jeff Hepner and Jason Curtis in that picture as well. Your brother was sick. He couldn't make it. He was planning on coming, but they all came to that game because Luke was going to break my record that game. And I didn't know about it. They'd kept it a secret. And I walked into the gym that night and saw those guys sitting there across the floor. And that's just what kind of guys they are. So that made that night, which was going to be special anyway, made it even more special with them being there.
It's a shame my brother couldn't make it. That's so cool those guys made it. Like that what an awesome, overall, you said that's got to be one of the greatest nights of your life to look back and have your son. If anyone's going to break your record, it's got to be your son,
Yeah, like I said, Barnesville doesn't have a rich basketball history, but I think if I have this right now, so Luke's the all-time leading scorer with just short of 2,400 points, and then me, I'm second. There's two other guys, one that played in the early 70s, one that played in the late 50s, and then my nephew is number 5, and my dad is number 6.
Are you kidding me?
No,
that is awesome. I never knew that. I mean, what an amazing basketball run for your family. And, who knows what's going to come up if Luke has a kid or, your daughter has a kid. But just to know that when I heard that, and then to know that you're the all-time father-son scoring duo in Ohio, I mean, that's just think about that. Like how, it's just incredible to me. I mean, it's got to be, and I mean, think of all the father-son duos that have played in the state over the last 60, 70, 80 years in basketball, a lot of good ones. And you guys are by far the leading scorers out of all of them. I mean, it's incredible to me.
I think it just speaks to our love of the game and how much we put into it and how much we just really enjoyed it. And it, my daughter played as well. She was a much better softball player than basketball player. My son Luke would tell you she's the best athlete in the family by far. And she'll get mad if I say this, but she knows it's true. She never worked at anything a day in her life. And athletically, she works extremely hard academically, but she just would walk out on the court or the field and do really, really well without working at it.
Just had that natural talent we were talking about.
Yeah, she was athletic. Yeah.
So, looking back now, is there anything, Matt, that you would have done differently in your career?
I don't think so. I could say that I would have went to Rio Grande right from the beginning and not going to the academy, but I valued my time at the academy and the discipline that I learned there. So yeah, I don't think so. I mean, when we get together on our annual golf outings, we talk about how we look back on our time at Rio, for example, and how it was just a special time and a time where we all look back on it really, really fondly. So I don't think so. I mean, basketball has been great to me. Basketball, you asked me what I did after basketball. Basketball is largely responsible for everything I have in this world. The first job that I got out of college at Ormet as a process engineer on the shop floor working 21 turn was because the plant manager at the time, and Ormet is a local place, it was close to where I grew up, was a basketball fan and had watched me play basketball in high school and thought, this is the kind of guy I want to come and work for us because he's dedicated and he works hard. So that's the reason I got that job.
No kidding. I mean, don't you love how it's a small world when it comes to sports in general? And there's so many guys I've had in this podcast, Matt, who I didn't even knew each other. Oh yeah, I played AAU with him, or I knew that guy's brother or whoever. It goes on so much. And some of the NBA guys I have on, there's so many connections they have. I mean, you don't realize that. Oh yeah, I mean, they know everybody. So it's a kind of a tight knit community in some ways, especially in Ohio sports. All the Ohio guys I have on, like all these Hall of Fame Ohio guys. I always say Ohio, when people aren't from here, who are from California or New York or Florida or Texas, don't understand the amount of talent here sports wise in Ohio. I mean, it's loaded with talent. It's not, people think it's like a flyover state. I'm like, they're between Cleveland. I mean, every area of the state has talent, and most of them have a ton of talent.
Yeah, and you watch, if you're watching a football game on a Saturday or a basketball game, even if they're out of state colleges and universities, now look at how many of those universities and colleges have Ohio kids on their teams. It's a lot.
A ton. It's truly a rich state when it comes to sports, not only history, but just the talent that comes out of here. And I think that's one of the things that I love growing up in Ohio is watching it firsthand and knowing all the different guys. And when I have people on the program, seeing all, literally decades of history, rich history of people who, either I knew personally or, people that knew my brother or my dad or whoever. So it was it's again, growing up in the state, I loved sports wise. It's just been a blessing for me personally, because it got me so many different connections beyond even my brother, people I grew up with at Avon Lake. And, so yeah, Ohio is extremely, just an amazing sports area.
I agree.
So 2 more questions for you.
Okay.
One of them basketball related and one of them is more personal.
Okay.
The basketball related question is, if you could, because you were such a great shooter, Matt, you were teaching any young kid today and anybody listening, what would you teach them as far as what would be the proper way to shoot, or what techniques would you teach somebody if you're, a little 10-year-old coming up and he goes, how do I shoot a 3-pointer? What would you say?
So I would say, don't shoot a 3-pointer. His first thing I would say as a 10-year-old kid. And my son will tell you this. He is so glad now when he looks back. He used to get so frustrated at me because I would not let him shoot 3-pointers because he wasn't shooting it the right way. So there's a way to shoot. And I could talk for hours about the technique on shooting the basketball because I have some pretty strong opinions on that. But if you can't shoot the ball the same way from 3 feet as you do from 30 feet, you don't need to be shooting out that far. As you get older and you get stronger, a lot of shooting from distance comes from your legs as well. You'll see guys, they push the ball like this because they're not strong enough, and they don't shoot the ball the same way here as they do farther out. So the biggest piece of advice I give everyone is, unless you can shoot the ball the right way, you don't need to be shooting out that far. That's the first thing. And I'm passionate about the whole science that's shooting the basketball and shooting the basketball from distance. And that is the most important advice I could give anyone today.
That is fantastic advice. And I remember my high school coach, my freshman year, saying that same exact thing. He goes, if you can't shoot exactly how you are from however close we were, then don't shoot the shot. Same exact thing. I'll never forget that. And that is great advice. When you look back at guys like Larry Bird and now Steph Curry, like where do you put Steph Curry in the conversation? He number one best 3-point shooter you've ever seen, or is there anybody better?
Oh, boy, he's probably got to be the best. And because he does it differently. Again, the game was different, played a little bit differently back in Larry Bird's day and stuff. Is Steph probably a better shooter? Yeah, I think so. Would I want Larry Bird taking the last shot for me? If it was a 3-pointer to win the game, probably. But there were some guys growing up that were just unbelievable shooters. I'll throw a name out that this is really going to date myself. A guy named Andrew Toney, who played for the Philadelphia 76ers. And he had a shot that was like this, and I can remember trying to emulate that and imitate that when I was a kid. Craig Hodges. I mean, there was some really, really fantastic shoot. Reggie Miller, not the best form and things like that, but man, could that guy shoot the basketball. So
you remember
a lot of
Drazen Petrovic.
Great shooter. Absolutely.
You guys really did have that was some of those guys back then to me are the reasons they're the Steph Currys today, is because, Reggie, like you said, Larry Bird, those guys were killers out there. Reggie, I was down on Ryle the game that he did the whole Spike Lee throat, and he the choking thing. He was 8 points in 20 seconds, whatever he did. Unbelievable. It's a shame he never won a championship.
And there's a big difference between shooting the basketball with range and shooting the basketball when someone's guarding you. There's a lot of guys that can stand there and pull it off a rack and shoot and have all kinds of time. But when you're moving or you're tired or someone's all up in you guarding you and you catch it and you get it off and you get it off quick, or like we used to do at Rio, we would shoot 3-pointers off the fast break, if you remember. It'd be a 3-on-1 fast break and Jack would throw you the ball and you would just catch it and shoot it. And that's a different kind of skill set than just being able to stand there and shoot in a game of horse or something like that.
Matt, where do you put MJ as far as just pure shooting?
Pure shooting? MJ's the best player ever, in my opinion. I would debate that with anyone. He was a clutch shooter. I wouldn't call him a great shooter. If you look at his shot, a lot of times it was very flat. He shot the ball with little arc and very flat, but a phenomenal player. But I wouldn't say a great shooter, no.
I agree 100%. I agree too. I think, overall what he did for those 13 years in the league, or 15, but that first 13 was unprecedented. 6-0 in the finals and all the 5 MVP, you can go on and on, scoring titles, first team all defensive player. It goes on and on and on. He was just unbelievable. And unfortunately he killed my Cavs every year, but I agree. He wasn't necessarily the best pure shooter, but he was just there's so many different things he could do. And he really didn't have many weaknesses. And
you brought up your Cavs there, Mark Price. Man, that guy could shoot the basketball.
How did I forget Mark Price?
That guy could shoot the basketball.
A lot of people credit Isaiah Thomas. Matt said Mark Price is probably the most underrated player of that era that he played against. He goes, everyone knew about all the other guards. I played Magic and all those guys. He goes, Mark Price gave me fits every time I played. And that's Isaiah saying that.
Yeah, and Mark, I loved watching. I was a big Mark Price fan. I love those Cavs teams too. They were fun. I can remember, you talked about loving the game of basketball. I had an old scorebook that had extra pages in it, and I would lay in front of the TV and keep book, like when the Cavs and Celtics played or the Bulls and Cavs played. Literally keep book.
I love it. I would do the same thing. I had when I was younger, Matt, me and my cousin we had a little basement two hoops set up in the basement, Fisher Price. We were 7, 8, 9, 10. And we would act like we were the two teams and play against each other. I loved it. It was the best. That's how I knew all those guys, because of my brother and all you guys. And then because of my own love of the game and collecting the magazines with all the rosters, because there was no internet back then. So I got to know all the players, so when I have some of those guys on the show, I always laugh. I said, I acted like I was you 30 years ago, and they start laughing, but it's true. It was the best. And the NBA and NBC in the 90s and the music and everything was just so nostalgic. I loved it. I wish we could go.
Yeah. You had the NBA, Brad, and you had all those great games and great teams. And the college basketball scene was totally different. You had Big Monday, if you remember, was the Big Ten.
I do.
You had the Big East, Pittsburgh and Syracuse and Villanova and St. John's and Georgetown. And it was a phenomenal time to watch basketball.
Oh, it was awesome. I've had Dennis Hopson on the show, who's the all-time leading scorer for Ohio State. I've had Dana Barros, who played for Boston. All those guys in that era. I've had so many of them, and I just love hearing their stories from the 80s and 90s. And back then, Matt, a lot of those guys stayed 4 years back then.
Oh, yeah.
So it wasn't as watered down as it is now. And I still love college basketball. Don't get me wrong. I'll watch the tournament. I love it. but it's just all the one and dones. It's kind of different. And that's why I think you see so many of these teams, the Florida Atlantics getting further just because they have more camaraderie. They have guys who stay 4 years where the other teams are, and the portal too, the transfer portal. But you didn't have Tim Duncans who stayed 4 years. I mean, a Tim Duncan now is one and done. See you later.
That's right.
So it's just a very different sport, but I agree. That was the golden era, in my opinion. I still love it today. I'll still watch the NBA and college basketball. But for me, and it probably is sentimental and nostalgic, but I just love the 80s and 90s feel. I love the whole game back then. And I think Jordan too, having Magic and Bird and then Jordan, that whole era. And then of course, Shaq late after that, we saw transcendent guys coming in the league that we've never seen before. I mean, even Shaq, Matt, I had never seen anything like him when he first came in the NBA. I mean, breaking hoops. And that was when you guys were in college. That was just unprecedented.
And it was different. Magic and Bird did something new and different their way. And then Jordan took it to another level. And then you said, like a transition into the Shaq era. It was pretty cool.
Truly iconic in many ways. But last question for you. And again, I want to thank you for coming on doing this. When you look back 30 years from now and you're retired on some beach somewhere and you're thinking about your life, what do you want people to know about the legacy of Matt Powell?
Well, I hope it's a lot more than just basketball. I hope they'd say, he was a good guy. He was a good friend, a good teammate, good father and a good husband, and someone that worked hard and valued people and relationships, and just generally a pretty good guy. That's what I hope.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming on and doing this. And it was an honor having you on talking about your career. I've been meaning to do this for a while with you. So
thank you.
It was awesome. And
I had
again,
a good time doing it.
You were a part of my youth, and I'll never forget the games I got to watch when I was younger, and you inspired me in many ways. So to have you on the show and to talk to you and then to, kind of take it from your youth to now is pretty cool.
Thanks, Brad. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt.
Here.
Okay, bye-bye. Take care. Okay, bye.